Hey guys, this is Mitch, and we're back with some more Conan. Not a specific Conan issue. That's not this week. It's just we're checking out some more Conan. Because there's always more Conan, and I'm always down to take a look at it. And part of me always kind of wonders why exactly I find the Conan character interesting. Or why he gained this much popularity in the first place. Because it's not as though the Conan formula is difficult to figure out. It's not particularly clever. It's a power fantasy. And it doesn't make any bones about it. It doesn't try to be subtle about it. It's not like, oh yeah, no, he's a barbarian, but, you know, and then whatever subverting expectations spin you want to put on. No, he's just a barbarian. And he gets himself into situations that most men would get themselves killed in within about 10 seconds. But he manages to push through because he's the best. Well, best at what? Best at things. If you have a thing, Conan is the best there is at it. And if that were the long and the short of it, I mean, it would probably be, you know, it never would have gained any kind of popularity. The twist seems to be in the execution. Because if you just had Conan hacking and smashing everything around him, which he can do, and he does from time to time. Like, most Conan stories have at least some hacking and smashing. Again, that wouldn't be enough on its own. So Robert E. Howard and Roy Thomas, spinning off of that, tends to put him in situations where something else is required. Either a trap that he has to figure out, or a situation that he has to find another solution for, sometime, you know, just through ingenuity. Because the concept might not be clever, but the character is. And that tends to, you know, make him more interesting. So the character is cool, and then there's all this peripheral stuff around him that just kind of adds a little bit to the overall appeal of the character. So I'm talking about, like, the movie itself, Conan the Barbarian. I don't think too many people really get down on Conan the Destroyer, or the new movie for that matter. Conan the Barbarian, I'm not a huge fan of myself, but, you know, I do like the poster. The poster's pretty great. I like Arnold Schwarzenegger's look in that movie. I love Basil Polidorius' soundtrack. I think Anvil of Crom is still one of the best theme songs I've heard to this date. And stuff like the comics. There is so much great art associated with the character Conan. From, yes, Barry Windsor Smith doing his original run, but also his prints. When he broke away from Marvel and was producing fine art, some of the stuff he produced was fully realized pieces, and some of those were based on Conan, like the Ram and Peacock, which I'm probably showing right now. There's undoubtedly thousands of John Buscema pages out there. There's the awesome Mike Kaluta covers, like what we're seeing here. And then, along with those, you also have the Frank Frazetta Conan images, which drew a lot of people to the books in the first place. So in the spirit of that, and after realizing that I didn't really touch on it much in the previous two episodes, I was kind of a little bit too busy talking about the artwork, particularly in the last one. We'll do a quick rundown on Conan himself. Conan is a barbarian. Done. Okay, let's move. No. So specifically, Conan is a Cimmerian, which is a northern province in Hyboria, I suppose. But it seems to be the landmass. And Conan has been many things over the course of his life. He's been, in addition to being in several armies, he's also been a pirate. He's been a mercenary. He's been an assassin. You know, basically any kind of thing you can hire a barbarian to do has shown up at some point or another in the Conan stories. And there were several characters who would return for multiple stories. So, for instance, there's Belit, the Queen of the Black Coast, who's a female pirate character. There's also Thothamon, who's an evil sorcerer who comes up several times as Conan's opponent. And we'll come back in this comic as well. And as he gets older, because Robert E. Howard would age him up eventually, he makes his way to Aquilonia and makes an enemy of the king there, and does end up deposing him and executing him, making himself the king of Aquilonia. And there were, I understand, 5 Robert E. Howard stories with Conan as king. So this series, Conan the King, is set basically during that time, or shortly after, where Conan is the established king of Aquilonia, has been for some time. He has his wife and his children, including his son, Khan, who's about 12 years old and is the heir apparent for Aquilonia. And looking at the cover here, we can see that this one's going to be focused a little bit on Khan himself. And so for this series here, we're going to focus a little bit, I'm not going to focus too much on one issue, maybe a bit more on this one than the others. But it's an interesting book because this is the first comic that Marc Silvestri got any dedicated time on. So this one's dated January of 1984. Marc Silvestri has done some fill-in work up until now, and he's finally given the green light to go ahead and start doing some full pencils on a book that's his own. And this will be, I think, the third Conan spin-off. This is how popular this character was, where you could have the Conan the Barbarian comic running concurrently with the Savage Sword of Conan magazine, the Savage Tales magazine, and the Conan the King comic. It's a crazy time. So in addition to early Marc Silvestri, we're also looking at the Mike Kaluta covers, such as this one here. And they're just stunning. And the Mike Kaluta covers start with the Marc Silvestri run. So I get the feeling that they brought him in specifically to make sure sales kept up, because they weren't for sure about this new kid. And we'll see why, because he is very raw. But if you want to make sure that your comic sells some copies, yeah, that cover is one way to start. All right. So we'll start with this opening splash from Marc Silvestri. And I think John Severin does the inks on this. That's an interesting combination. I'm only saying John because it turns out he did the cover on issue 18. This is issue 20. Otherwise, I would have thought it was Marie. So I'll just read the opening thing here. Know ye, O Prince, that Conan of barbarous Cimmeria did wander a lawless adventurer across Hyboria's golden lands and glittering seas till fate did yield him proud Aquilonia's kingdom of his own, a beauteous wife and children fair. Yet somber sat the barbarian on civilization's throne, ever uneasy the crown upon his brow. That's a thing that will become a recurring theme, is that Conan, I mean, yeah, he's king. He's finally got his own empire, which he always felt he deserved as a barbarian kind of warrior. And of course, once he gets it, he's not allowed to be a warrior anymore. Now he has to be a diplomat. And of course, he's not comfortable in that role. Pretty nice opening splash, though. It's a little rough, but I think John Severin's picking up a fair bit of slack here to make sure it doesn't look too rubbery or anything. So, we open up here, and young Khan is going on his first outing by himself. Well, and by himself, I mean, him with his entourage. So a full prince's guard. And he's enjoying his freedom, even as he gets stalked by these warriors off in the shrubs here. And we can see a fair amount of shortcuts already. I kind of noticed that on the flip through. Marc Silvestri wasn't, I don't know, I'm not sure if he was intentionally skimping on detail or if he didn't realize that it was necessary all the time. So we're not getting a lot of background stuff here, which is kind of excusable. This panel's pretty good for the shrubbery. Not overly rendered, but, it's all right. This one here starts to get a little bit questionable with this many silhouetted basic figures. And he's having an easy drink with his prince's guard when all of a sudden the horses start whinnying. And, you see lack of backgrounds everywhere in here. Maybe assuming the colorist will pick up the slack. It's like young Rob. And while they watch, the skies turn black. And we'll see this particular effect fairly often. This is how Marc Silvestri's going to try and do a bit of detail without really doing detail. At least at the beginning. And it's interesting how simple these early pages are. Again, no background, almost no background, none. And this one is just background. But in addition to that, there's next to no dialogue as well, which might have been intentional for making it all of a sudden unnaturally quiet, which I think is part of it. But it does tend to feel like this page is also kind of pointless. And the warriors all prepare themselves, and again, no background, nothing moving off in the shrubs, and then they all kind of burst out. And again, very silhouetted. Now we're going to see some John Buscema influence in some of the rendering here. And some of the figure work, actually. There is, there is some quality to his figure work, where it's not stiff most of the time. A little bit here and there, a little bit unnatural, but like, you know, for the most part, for a new guy, he's doing fairly well. And this face here isn't too far off from the kind of face John Buscema might draw. And so, these still silhouetted forms descend upon the prince's camp and start killing all of his guards. I assume. It's a little tough to figure out exactly what's going on, you know, except that, you know, the dialogue states they are slaughtering us before he gets stabbed through the chest here. But yeah, a lot of obfuscated detail. Part of that is going to be because of the PG thing, but they would, you know, they wouldn't completely shy away from bloodshed on these. And yeah, no details in backgrounds. It's interesting. Later on, they would assign a finisher to Silvestri. So, and he would do breakdowns. I think to kind of show him the ropes, like, okay, you know what? You've got some basics down that we like, but this is what it should look like. So I'll show you some examples of that. But even this panel design is very basic and kind of boring. And for a Conan comic, we're kind of zipping through this. But like some of this figure work is actually a little bit impressive. And even this image here, where some of the holding lines, well, you know what? I say some of the holding lines get erased. I'm not sure if they get erased or if they're a bit too thin to be picked up by the copier. And I think this one was meant to be colored, and I thought it would be either a bit more enduring with a flat color, or maybe it just would have been too samey. If you have this panel right next to this panel, very similar angle, almost similar depth. I think that's probably the case. But we get to a last stand situation. Nice shot, although it would have been nice to get a bit more detail in on these assailants. And it's just the prince left. And he's able to take them on one by one a little bit because he's on this raised ground here. He has the high ground. But one is able to sneak up behind him and take him out. Judging by the cover, you would think he was dead, but I mean, not too likely in this comic. And one remaining guard witnesses this, I assume. We haven't seen him up until then, so he's not very well established. And Khan falls to the ground, and the remaining guard takes his own life because samurai, Ronin stuff, probably. And the assailants take Khan's signet ring, and they disappear. And odd panel. I mean, man, to think of what would have been here on the page itself, it just would have been these birds. And then the colorist gets to kind of figure it out. So yeah, Marc Silvestri's taking a few liberties, or I don't know, maybe he's having difficulty keeping up with the schedule right off the bat. That could be the case. It's a grind. So one man turns out to not be completely dead. Rises and sees that everybody else is, including the king's son. And because he's, I assume, concussed, he decides to take home the prince's robe and sword instead of his body. But sure. This is a pretty good spread, actually. Where I don't know if he's been told to maybe up the detail a little bit. Like shots like this definitely need it, because if you leave off this little bit of shrubbery in the background, this turns into basically a flat angle, which makes the shot boring. Shots like this need a bit of extra detail. You can't just do the silhouette of a mountain. And it's nice that he's, you know, he's doing it. Like the night sky here looks very nice and looks much better than if you left it blank. We still get a couple here and there, but if it's just a couple of small panels on the page, it's not a problem. And not a bad shot of Aquilonia at night here. in the palace of King Conan in Tarantia, the royal capital. There we go. Where Conan is stuck in some sort of royal event that he doesn't really want to be a part of, but this is his life now. And yeah, we can still see some Buscema in some of these faces. Some of the line work, it's not 100% there by any means. But, you know, you can see that's kind of what he's shooting for. And that guard shows up with the cloak and the sword and announces the prince is dead. And this panel looks very Buscema. Actually, to the point where I wonder if he drew it. Potentially. It's very well constructed. Although I have to think there would be a bit more detail in the background, maybe. And you get your moment of silence while Conan contemplates this, and then just starts raging and tearing apart the Great Hall here. And he's like, oh shit, the king's berserk. And this stuff's okay. There's ways to amp this up so it's more intense, but Silvestri doesn't know them yet, and that's all right. It's still, like, it's good enough. And his rage is stopped by his queen, who asks if it's true. And, yeah, finds out, and now he has to be, you know, he can't just be the warrior, he's still the husband/father. And we get the origin of when Conan became king, which is an interesting choice for issue 20, but I think they would do that every once in a while. Just kind of reset a little bit before going forward again. These were double-sized issues. So you can't, you know, every once in a while, it's not bad to pad something out with like 5 pages of backstory. And, you know, not everybody's going to know who Conan is. So they tell when he was captured by the former king of Numidia, and Zenobia was a fellow captive, part of the king's harem. And Conan swore when he broke out that he would wed her. This is in the Robert E. Howard stories. And it kind of stops before it gets to that point. But in the Conan the King continuity, he does escape the palace, and he does go off and wed Zenobia, and they have their first child, Khan. And we get an awkward, kind of Tarantino-ish, further skip back, but not very far, just like a couple of days, where her pregnancy was labored. And there was a witch there that had a prophecy that Zenobia would survive the birth, and the king would have a son. And we get a little bit of family drama, where they're both grieving over their lost son. I mean, you know, that's all well and good. And we're going to get some more background, even, about how Conan became king in the first place. When he was first working for the former king, but got a little too drunk at victory celebrations and was thrown in prison. And all of a sudden around here, the rendering gets quite a bit more detailed, actually. Was it here? I think it was here. Yeah, all of us, we're already seeing much more detail in the small figures here than we were previously. And kind of a different inking style. So I think at this point, they've kind of realized, all right, we need to help this kid out a bit. So I think Marc Silvestri's still doing the layouts, or maybe even doing the pencils he was previously, but then they're just adding more lines on top of it. So yeah, Conan is released and finds his way back to the king, who pleads with him to spare his life. He'll give him his crown, just let him live. And Conan agrees if he leaves. And of course, as soon as he turns his back, the king tries to stab him, at which point Conan snaps his neck and takes his crown. That's about how you'd expect him to get a kingdom. But yeah, very different kind of line work here. It's interesting. And Conan swears to find the murderer of his son. Except, of course, that Khan isn't completely dead. He lives yet in the wilderness in a pretty Silvestri-looking page, actually. This is definitely with a finisher added on. Yeah, and there are several inkers throughout this. So we've got Marie Severin. Oh, it was Marie. I was wrong. Shit. We've got Mike Gustovich, Dave Simons, Charles Vess. This could be Charles Vess. I know he likes his extra line work. Joseph Rubinstein, Judith Marcos, Jack Abel, Harry Candle, and Ron Fontes, and Marc Silvestri. I would guess the Marc Silvestri stuff is the earliest stuff. All right. So that's issue 20. And I'm not going to go through all of them like that. We're just going to take a quick flip through the rest of these. But that kind of sets up this little run that Marc Silvestri has. So we're going to continue the Mike Kaluta covers. This is one of the better ones. Almost more of a focus on what looks like a vulture more than an eagle or anything. But yeah, interesting choice for backgrounds. Like, what is this thing behind them? And yeah, so we're going to see way more detail here because... Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because Marc Silvestri needs to be shown the ropes a bit more. He wasn't quite as ready as everybody thought. One thing that's irritating on this is they don't do credits properly. So they don't show them for the first part of the book. Like, there are credits in here somewhere usually, but I don't even know where. Sometimes they're towards the back. I feel like that's a Jim Shooter thing, because the Valiant comics also did that at the beginning. So we'll get some good shots every once in a while. This is... I was going to say, this is still Roy Thomas writing, right? But, like, there's no way to even verify. Oh, here we go. But we do still get the odd splash page. Strange placement for it. This is like page 7. Nope, still no credits. Sometimes they put it on the splash. Yeah, and you can't really see much of Silvestri in here. He is doing the breakdowns, and the panels themselves, like the page layouts are still pretty simple, and not from the best angles. Like, stuff like this is just awkward. But we get a few shots that maybe aren't quite inspired, but it's just like, okay, no, wait, there's some skill here. You know, stuff like this isn't bad. The perspective's maybe a little off with this guy here in the front. But, maybe not. I want to say this is Alan Kupperberg who does the finishes on these, because I know he does a couple of these. Oh, here we go. Oh, Jeff Isherwood, that's right. And Alan Zelenitz does the script. Okay, so we are past Roy Thomas now. And this one is Alan Zelenitz and Marc Silvestri by himself. And this will repeat in some of the later issues where they don't give him the main story. They give him the backup one to kind of work on his skills, that feels like. And this is Conan, son of the Barbarian King. Khan is short for Conan again. He's Conan Jr. And it looks like he's already taking some lessons to heart with how much background work he's putting in here. We don't see any of these blank backgrounds that we saw in the first issue, at least not yet. And stuff like this shows some pretty good understanding of figure work. Like I said, he's a fan of John Buscema. And you can see a bit of Silvestri, like later Silvestri, in stuff like this. We'll see a bit more of it as we progress. But yeah, this stuff, it's very, like, again, you can see why he left out the detail here. He doesn't know what to do for penciling and backgrounds. He just kind of hatches it quickly because he's not sure exactly what would end up looking good. He knows what to do with figures, and he's got a pretty good sense of proportion and perspective. It's a little iffy, but not too bad. But yeah, he's kind of out to sea when it comes to the backgrounds at this point. And then he has to get a whole bunch of enemies to fight Conan on this bridge. Well, actually to fight, it looks like two opposing sides about to wage war with young Conan stuck in the middle. And they're able to kind of hot gates them, and because the bridge is so narrow, and they can take them on one by one. For the most part, nothing too spectacular here. And he had to rush at the end here to fit everything in by the looks of it. Issue 26 with another great cover, which is interesting considering it's almost like it's off-center. You know, like it feels like it should be focused a bit more over here, but the focus is more the arrow than anything. But, I mean, you know, because isn't a lot besides the arrow, you do still end up focusing on Conan, who's separated from everybody else overlapping here. And this one is set in the desert. I believe this is also Jeff Isherwood. This looks very much like the last issue. And yeah, so there's good work here. But, I mean, you know, when you're used to Conan being done by John Buscema, this is a bit of a step down, obviously. Yeah, this is more house style around this time. Jim Shooter probably loved this comic. Some good detail coming in some of these. This one doesn't even seem to focus too much on Conan at all. Yeah, Marc Silvestri breakdowns, Jeff Isherwood finishes. And young Conan as drawn just by Marc Silvestri. And again, you can kind of see some older Silvestri starting to come through. And this figure, again, is very nice. For a young guy. Kind of a goofy face. Is this young Conan or what is this? Oh, this isn't, okay, my mistake. This isn't young Conan. This is Conan the Barbarian. So 6 months have passed since Prince Conan II, firstborn of Aquilonia's king, arrived in fabled Kitai and met his half-brother Kang Shou. Now, disillusioned with his father, Khan decides to settle in Paikang, content to remain in the Far East, and then rumors of war sweep through the village. It doesn't explain a whole lot. Oh, at least we end on a cool shot. Or what could be a cool shot, again, if he knew how to work it a bit better. He doesn't understand the composition here. Again, I don't myself, but you should be building up this triangular thing, from what I understand. So, probably having a bit more. It's tough to do out in the woods, I suppose. I mean, you could have some trees nearby that point inward, or outward for that matter. Yeah, this one is almost completely drawn by Jeff Isherwood, so we'll skip the interior for the most part, but we do have to touch on the cover, which is one of the best covers. Maybe, period. That might be going a bit far. But I mean, this cover is like just stunning, and is the kind of thing that makes me wish I was more familiar with Mike Kaluta's work. I think Mike Kaluta is one of those guys who didn't do very much comics work at all. He did a lot of covers, from what I understand, and did a lot of fine art stuff. But like, I want this as a poster. There's a couple of covers in here that are like that. Issue 28, probably the weakest of the covers we've seen so far. It's kind of convoluted. And the figures are kind of conflicted with each other, it feels like. This is another one that's drawn almost exclusively by Alan Kupperberg on finishes, with Marc Silvestri still providing breakdowns from what I understand. And if that's the case, then, I mean, shots like this are pretty impressive, at least. And it's interesting that we get stuff like this, which is very unimpressive. Like, this kind of thing could be done much more skillfully. And will be, of course, in future. I mean, you know, Marc Silvestri doesn't exactly become like a slouch in his later years. But yeah, no, these panel layouts are so basic. And, I mean, like, at least the panels themselves end up being pretty big because of it, but he doesn't pick his spots very well, like, for what to draw. This one almost works. It's still too plain, but, like, a bit more, like, some clouds in there, I think, a bit more weathering on the hull of the boat, and, I mean, more dialogue. There's, like, no dialogue in this. This is how you know it's not Roy Thomas. And issue 29, so this is the last one I have. This is the last one for the Marc Silvestri run. And this was the one where he does take back over on the pencils. And not only that, we actually get some proper credits on this one, so that's nice. Inks by Art Nichols, who's a name we might be familiar with because he penciled Magnus Robot Fighter. So starting off here, this is some improvement. He's been doing some work. He's actually, so he has been learning. He kind of took his benching to heart, and he's like, well, I'm going to show that coach that I've learned a thing or two. And already we can kind of see that might be the case. This is a nice panel design here. The vertical panel with the worm's eye view shot, or bird's eye view for that matter, is one we've seen fairly often. I remember seeing a couple from Eric Larson, and it never fails. Some of these are a little too open. Again, I think it's more the lack of dialogue balloons. But he's definitely improved his backgrounds. You see, like, he's not just scribbling anymore. Well, he's scribbling a little bit, but he's doing it more judiciously. When we get our crowd shots, we're getting more figures. We're getting background mixed with figure. Like, this is much more detailed than what was in that first issue he did. Even look at the rendering he's putting in on the stone here. That's some nice stuff. And shots like this, like pages like this, are actually pretty impressive. You know, there's no big splashy shot exactly, but like this took some work. This took a fair bit of work. And I mean, you know, 6 months previous to this, he probably wouldn't have tried to draw that many guys. And this here feels like a slack off page. This is the return of young Conan to the throne room and cause for celebration. Good stuff. And yeah, so it feels a little bit like he's losing steam at this point. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. You know, he's losing the backgrounds here. He's not working quite as hard for these panel compositions, because it does take work. When it's, you know, you haven't been churning the pages out, it takes thought to come up with interesting shots over and over again. And he's making sure, at least when he gets his faces in close-up, yeah, okay, I'm going to make sure those are good. But yeah, he is kind of holding off again, and then ramps it back up. You know what? This is a familiar formula. You know what this formula reminds me of? Blood Force. You get the standing around talking pages, and you spend a little bit of time establishing the scene and setting up your backgrounds in the first few panels so that you can slack off later on when it's just talking heads. And you put some work in on those heads so that it's not boring, but it is still kind of slacking off. And then you get to an action scene, you go, okay, you know what? It wakes you up a little bit. I got to put some more detail on this. You know what? I realize I kind of let myself go a little bit. I'm going to get it back together now. And he definitely does on this page. He's going to town a bit on this smoke, but doesn't have it quite down just yet. This is a nice, impressive shot. He is starting to lose the plot again here, though. When you get down to the cross-hatched backgrounds, that's when you know that you're taking it a bit too easy. And yeah, these are almost impressive. You know, this shot here, not too bad. Certainly satisfactory. These ones, a little less so. And some of these face constructions are starting to become more and more Silvestri. Like that mouth is a later Silvestri kind of mouth. Yeah, it's like each scene transition kind of wakes him up, reinvigorates him, makes him realize that he was losing the thread a bit. And he's having to find solutions where he can keep churning out the pages quickly and not lose too much detail. And I think we're getting a little bit of almost caricature. Because earlier on, he would have tried a lot harder to make this face more realistic. This is like almost a cartoony kind of face. It's just the one moment, every once in a while. But you can see him figuring it out. And like shots like this, I think this would have been rendered much more carefully. But here, it's a bit more dashed off. But in a good way. In the Marc Silvestri way, that he would, I mean, when you get to Uncanny X-Men, when he's doing 2 issues a month, it goes just like fucking light speed. And this becomes his style. But he's got the figure work down well enough that he doesn't have to over-labor the drawings anymore when it comes to drawing a figure. So he can just get the basic shape of a person here and figures he can get that motion he's looking for. It might not be 100% on target here, I say as he throws the knife. But it's getting closer. And then he reverts a bit more to the slightly more labored style. Like this isn't anywhere near as improvisational as this panel here, it feels like. I wonder if this was a moment of realization. And then he was unsure, went back to what had kind of been working for him before. Again, this one, a bit more of a cartoony face, almost Rick Leonardi looking. And you get down here, and you know what? He's having to do more of these standing around talking pages, but he is working in some background details. And again, that spontaneous kind of line is starting to show up. And I mean, that becomes, like I said, Marc Silvestri's style. It's all over his Uncanny run. It's all over Wolverine when he's doing that. He does quite a bit of line work in that. But I feel like Dan Green was really helping him out on that. And we get to this point here, and like, this is 9 issues later. And You know, issue 20, Marc Silvestri, I don't think is capable of this drawing. Or this page, really. To be honest, it would have looked a lot more stiff and awkward. It just looks a little, it just would have looked less sincere, less assured. Yeah, and he's getting more detail in the backgrounds. Not, you know, as much as is necessary. This is, again, another standing around talking kind of page. But yes, this is much better. I feel like he's starting to figure out a faster style. And as this is the last Silvestri Conan book, I wonder if his... There we go. There's our big shot. Which is a little phoned in. Not 100%. Like, you know, there's work on this page. But, like, these background buildings, if you want to call them that, this fucking Duplo castle over here. And the basic figures, they're here for the first row. And then they kind of disappear. That one's a bit of a phone-in page. But he got it done. And I assume on time. Yes. It was a bi-monthly book because it was double-sized. So this was July of 1985. He would do a few Web of Spider-Mans after this, as well as a few X-Factor issues, and 3 issues of X-Men versus Avengers. And then 2 years after this, 1987, he would begin working on Uncanny X-Men, and he would stay on there for like 2.5 years. And become the Marc Silvestri we all know. So yeah, that's it for Conan the King. A different kind of book from what we've been looking at. I mean, we're used to, you know, you get Barry Windsor-Smith, who was the young, raw rookie who quickly became the superstar. And then you get the established superstar who found his dream project. And now you get the young, raw rookie who just becomes a little less raw. I don't know. I always feel like this one's more interesting because, I mean, part of it is that we skipped over the middle part of Barry Windsor-Smith's learning curve because those issues are just too hard to get. They're too expensive. But, yeah, being able to see it issue from issue and see him pick up things here and there is very interesting. This is a very interesting time for Marc Silvestri. I've seen some of his later stuff. Like, I've seen, like, a couple of those Web of Spider-Man issues. I've got an issue of Cloak and Dagger drawn by Marc Silvestri. You know, some of those fill-in books. And it's like, wow, early Marc Silvestri, that's going to be so weird. And it just kind of looks like not quite finished Marc Silvestri. This one's a little different because you get to see that progression. So that's cool. So next time we're going to finish it up with a new Conan the Barbarian book. 2019's Conan the Barbarian by Jason Aaron, Mahmoud Asrar, and Gerard Zaffino. But that's going to do it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit the notification bell so you know when the next one's coming out, and hit subscribe if you haven't yet. Because we're getting near 1,000 subs, and you know, I want to hit that landmark. That'd be kind of sick. Go and subscribe on my Patreon. That's where all the Blood Force stuff is, the pages and the finished comics, as well as these videos before they make it to YouTube, usually a week or so in advance. Also, there's some Patreon exclusive content there. And if you go and follow me on Instagram, drawings on there from time to time, and you can DM me for commissions. But yeah, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.